bless the winding path that brought us here. I bless this day distinct amidst our days. I bless the light, the music later now, the music later now. I bless the interweaving of our ways, the lifting of the burdens that we bear. I bless the broken body that we share. Sanctus the heart, Sanctus the Spirit cries, Sanctus the flesh, in every touch replies.
Hello everyone. It's so lovely to be here and be with you all this evening. We're time travelling, so this is a hello to everybody in the Lady Chapel in St Column on Sunday the 20th of June in the evening. And it's also a good afternoon to everybody who's here on Sunday the 27th of June at the 4 o'clock service. So we're all together but a week apart. I know some of you have meditated before, but for others this will be a totally new experience, and I'll guide you through. Hello. You should all have a printed sheet, if you're in the Lady Chapel, which has on it a labyrinth. We'll need those later, but they can be put aside for the moment. And if you're watching this at home, we'll put the finger labyrinth up on the screen so that you'll be able to follow it at home later. In this morning's Gospel reading, in Mark chapter 4, Jesus rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Near the end of the day, our minds may be fizzing with what we've done, the things we need to do, what we have planned for tomorrow. So the order to quiet, be still, applies as much to us and our minds as to the wind and the waves. With that in mind, I'm going to begin with an interrupted meditation. So first of all, if we sit comfortably in our chairs with our feet spaced, feel the floor underneath your feet. Feel the chair supporting you, and gently close your eyes. I will say some words and repeat these to yourself through the time, not aloud, but in your head. Concentrate on these words. And then a minute later I'll speak again. Concentrate on these words, and so on. I'll begin and end each of those sections with a bell. If you feel your mind wandering at any point, Return your concentration to the words just said. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be. Be still and know that I am God. It's been quite a year and a bit for so many reasons. We've all had our own lockdown experiences, and some of them may be captured in this poem written by a 17-year-old called Lynette. I didn't know I'd miss waiting at traffic lights, waiting for a burst of colour, a static of sound. I didn't know I'd miss noise, crowds, the breath of rain as it hits pitched tarmac, being near enough to hear people's breath. I didn't realise I was only exactly alone when I was walking home from school or to the shops. I didn't realise it was the in-between time that held me together. Through the lockdowns, I've had one song that keeps coming back to me, a song from my childhood. In the first lockdown, it was the chorus that particularly resonated. I, an only child, used to and happy in my own company, realised that I missed others. I loved that I could meet others on Zoom, but missed the incidental, the bumping into friends in the street, the banter in the butcher's, the chance meeting in town and country, on a bench by the church, in a park, by the beach. The song is Streets of London by Ralph McTell, and in his chorus he writes, "How can you tell me you're lonely and say to me that the sun don't shine? So let me take you by the hand and lead you through the streets of London. I'll show you something that'll make you change your mind." And then he outlines some characters, the unseen people, the people who are there but never really noticed.
change your mind.
I've been reading this book by Jonathan Herbert called Accompaniment, Community and Nature. Jonathan is ordained and he lives in the community at Hillfield Friary in Dorset. He is currently the pastor to travellers in Salisbury Diocese. And he writes, I wake to the sound of the alarm on my phone. It's hot and it's dark in the windowless room I've been sleeping in. I pull on my clothes, fold up the blanket and tiptoe down the hall, trying not to wake the sleeping household of Francis, his wife and their 5 children, and the 5 orphans from his brother's family who they care for. I've stayed overnight with them in Iriri, a rough market town in the poorest, dustiest part of eastern Uganda, called Karamoja, in order to catch the bus to the capital, Kampala. No one can be quite sure when the bus is going to arrive, as it will only set off from its base in Moroto when there are enough passengers aboard. I need to be at the stop by 4 a.m, just in case it comes early, as there's only 1 bus a day. I pull on my backpack, and as I go to unlock the door, Francis appears, trying to shake the tiredness out of his body. I assume he's up to say goodbye and relock the door, but instead he comes outside into the pitch darkness and says he'll accompany me to the bus stop. I'm glad of his companionship, as immediately dogs start barking, and I realise I'd struggle to find the way. He leads me through the compound, past mud huts with grass thatch, the walls so thin you can hear the occupants snoring, past blockwork shacks with tin roofs, and onto the main dirt track, which serves as the high street. I turn to thank him again and say goodbye, but he insists on staying with me. I try to persuade him to go back to bed, but he stays. We don't say much, just look up at the dark mass of the huge hill overshadowing the town and listen to a couple of drunks still drinking, talking nonsense in the shop front behind us. We sit together companionably enough and wait, and eventually, just as it's beginning to grow lighter, we hear the growl of the bus engine. I climb aboard and thank him for his hospitality, but most of all for being with me in the dark hours before the dawn. Those couple of hours are what I would describe as accompaniment, a way of being with others which has somehow become lost in our culture, a culture that stresses the need for independence and personal autonomy. In rural Uganda, it's just part of daily life and a totally natural way of supporting and enjoying other people, and a simple expression of how people belong together. Sitting on the bench with Francis, I thanked him for being with me, and I introduced the idea of accompaniment to him. He just laughed and said, "But that's what everyone does around here." I was glad to be accompanied by Francis. It helped me feel safe that morning. It took away the fear that can come with loneliness. But more importantly, it made me feel like I'd received that most precious gift of all, somebody else's time. He was happy to sit and wait, doing nothing, expecting nothing. which is such a contrast to the way I've been programmed. To be aware of time and the need to get things done. In the West, time is seen as something lineal that's going to run out, so we need to make the best use of it, pack as much as we can into this one life. My encounters with people in rural Africa, India, the Pacific, gypsies and travellers, and with those of a more spiritual bent, have led me to understand time as something more cyclical and something to be shared. Accompaniment is a process that has at its heart this giving of time to another, not expecting instant outcomes, but rather to see the act of being fully present with another as something that can bring joy and comfort to the accompanier and those accompanied. On the road to Emmaus, from Luke chapter 24. Now that same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened here in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we'd hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel, and what is more, it is the 3rd day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus." He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going further. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and appeared to Simon." Then the 2 told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. I have another reading from the Jonathan Herbert book. Halfway through my pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela, I began to feel quite drained. I'd been a couple of days without really relating to anyone. My body was creaking a bit from walking 20 miles or so a day. I was in that dangerous place that a friend in Alcoholics Anonymous uses the acronym HALT to describe. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired. All along the pilgrimage route were fountains where you could fill up with water, which would keep you going till the next watering place. That afternoon I stopped at a fountain right on the edge of a town I'd walked through, only to find it was dry, and I'd either have to continue for 5 miles over a sun-baked escarpment or go a mile back into town. I raised my pilgrim staff and hammered it into the ground with a volley of expletives, then looked round ashamedly to see if anyone was watching. Fortunately not. I decided to go on without water through the heat of the afternoon, continuing to mutter a rich range of expletives. Eventually I got over the hill, and as the sun slipped lower in the sky, it lit up the honey-coloured stone of the Church of St. Nicholas, where I'd been told you could sleep the night. Outside on a bench sat 2 men who smiled at me and beckoned me forward. They were drinking from white plastic cups and asked, "Vino?" "Si," I replied, and I sat with them, sipping fine wine from Genoa, where they explained they were from. They told me they were part of a pilgrim association spending 2 weeks offering hospitality. I sat with them, watching other pilgrims pass. I then took a shower round the back of the church, and as I was putting on a pair of woolly socks, I was told to leave my feet bare and summoned to the front of the 11th century Romanesque church. Vittorio and Paolo, our hosts, then donned short black woolen capes decorated with scallop shells, and I understood we were going to do a bit of religion. They read some prayers in Latin, then knelt at our feet, placed them in a bowl of warm water, gently washed them, tenderly dried them, and finally kissed them. Then it was time for supper, and we moved to a temporary trestle table in the middle of the church. We had a starter of Italian cheese or prosciutto, accompanied by more red wine from Genoa. Then it was time for the main course, pasta with pesto from Genoese basil, and I rather rudely asked for more, thinking that was it. Then the fish came, accompanied by a Genoese white wine, followed by the main course, and back to vino tinto. I grinned at the French-Canadian couple and said, "This is just like Babette's feast." They nodded back vigorously, also feeling resonances with that film, where Babette serves a sumptuous feast to a whole village of strict Calvinist Protestants who survive on a miserable everyday diet of fish and bread soup. Fine pastries made by Italian nuns living up the road, stuffed with cream, were offered, then a final course of cheeses, followed by coffee, then grappa from a large bottle with a lemon inside. Before staggering to my bed at the back of the church, I asked what time we had to leave. I was told not to worry, that we'd be woken by dolce music. Sure enough, while it was still dark, I was woken by a beautiful, gentle aria from Puccini and quickly dressed. I didn't want the magical spell that had been woven the night before to be broken, so tried to slip away unnoticed into the dark, starlit morning. But Vittorio asked me to wait a moment, donned his cloak again, and took me into the porch, where he incanted a prayer of blessing and kissed me on both cheeks. I can still today feel the stubble on his face brushing against mine. My eyes filled with tears of joy, and I walked out into the starlit morning, feeling completely restored and full of energy. It was 2 hours before I stopped singing. The story is told of some seekers after truth who asked the Buddha who he was. Some asked if he was a guru. No, he replied. Others asked if he was a prophet. No, he replied. Still others asked if he was a healer. No, he replied. Well, who are you then? They asked. I am the one who is awake, he answered. To be awake, to live in the present moment, seems to be at the heart of most spiritual practices. In Buddhist practice, paying attention to each breath is a way of learning to stay in the moment. In the yogic traditions of Hinduism, again, staying with the breathing and concentrating on the body's movement keeps the devotee in the eternal moment. In Islam too, the Salat prayer, postures and words focus the believer on Allah alone. In the Christian contemplative tradition, there are numerous techniques for staying in the moment, again through focusing attention on the body, breathing exercises, or the repetition of a mantra. On my own journey, the people who've most impressed me have been those who seem to live in the moment. People who have a capacity to see things as they really are, unencumbered by fear about the future or trapped in the past. Too often, I meet people who are really somewhere else, still caught up in their last meeting or keen to move on to the next challenge. And yes, I also allow myself to be dragged away from being fully awake to another. As someone who loves multitasking and doing several jobs at a time, juggling various commitments, it's easy not to stay in the moment and not give the person in front of you your full attention. I'll never forget Peter, a man with Asperger's syndrome, telling me, "Jonathan, you need to learn to do just one thing at a time." That was the only way he could cope with what, for him, were the otherwise impossible multiple pressures to relate to too many things and people at once. And staying in the moment, doing one thing at a time, is wisdom for us all. Thich Nhat Hanh, Vietnamese Buddhist monk and peacemaker, famously says, "When you're doing the washing up, do the washing up." I'm slowly learning that if I concentrate on doing just one thing at a time, the day is still full of variety. Things still get done, and somehow the day seems to flow more freely. I recognise also when someone is giving me their full attention, focusing solely on the person in front of them, and what a gift it is. We're now coming to our second and final meditation, a chance for us to finger walk alongside each other. For those in the Lady Chapel, you'll need your labyrinth on the sheet of paper for this. For those of you watching at home, the labyrinth should appear on your screen, so you should be able to still do this at home. A labyrinth is one of the most ancient tools for spiritual growth and development, dating back to medieval Christianity. Walking a labyrinth is like going on a pilgrimage where beautiful and unpredictable things can happen. Sometimes a burden is laid down. Sometimes a challenge is picked up. Sometimes just a stopping at the centre is enough. Sometimes we need to be turned round immediately. You can use the labyrinth for as little or as much time as you wish. If you finish before the end of time, then sit as for the first meditation and concentrate on the words of that first meditation, repeating them in your head. I will begin and end the meditation with a bell, and the meditation will last for 10 minutes. So sit comfortably in your chairs with your feet slightly apart, a straight back, and look at the labyrinth. Watch your finger trace the path through the labyrinth. If your mind wanders, return your attention to your finger, walking the labyrinth. We'll now have a time of prayer together. This can be silent prayer or spoken prayer, words or full prayers. Join in as you wish. For Sue's granddaughter in intensive care, for Sue and her family. I share with you the prayer of St. Brendan the Navigator. Help me to journey beyond the familiar and into the unknown. Give me the faith to leave old ways and break fresh ground with you. Christ of the mysteries, I trust you to be stronger than each storm within me. I will trust in the darkness and know that my times, even now, are in your hand. Tune my spirit to the music of heaven, and somehow make my obedience count for you. Amen. And finally this evening, I leave you with an African proverb, said by Francis, who we met in the book. He said, "Don't walk behind me, or you'll make me feel too self-important and puffed up. Don't walk in front of me, lest you leave me behind. Rather walk alongside me, and we'll face life joyfully together." So to everybody in the Lady Chapel and everybody at home, thank you for accompanying us